Howdy, Ausgrave royalty here. My name is Justin. Welcome to another video in our ongoing series on Archetypes by Dr. Anthony Stevens, the great book. This is part 8 in the series, so if you want the maximum amount of context, I highly encourage you all to watch the previous videos just to catch up a little bit as a refresher or for those who are new to the series. In the last few videos, we've been talking a lot about masculinity and femininity, the anima and the animus, and how that can affect upbringing. We've talked about the mother and the father and the family archetypes, and how we're archetypally wired from birth to expect a mother and father and family structures. And if that sounds interesting or incendiary, go ahead and check those out. So for the gobbledygook, for the first timers, archetypes, kind of have a bad name, bad connotation to them, that they're kind of spiritual and new agey. But we spent the beginning of this series talking about their biological roots and how they actually manifest in the body and the brain's hemispheres and the communication between them. How archetypes possess a duality. They're both biological and psychological. They're biological structures that ready us for psychological experiences of a certain kind. And at the very beginning of this series, we talked about how Stevens, his origin story, how he was working in attachment theory and comparing it to behaviorism, which was the dominant academic paradigm in psychology at the time, and how attachment theory moved things forward, but maybe not enough. And then Stevens was led to the archetypal theory from Carl Jung. So that's a quick recap, and just for some definitions, Stevens defines archetypes as innate neuropsychic centers possessing the capacity to initiate, control, and mediate the common behavioral characteristics and typical experiences of all human beings, irrespective of race, culture, and creed. So far from being spiritual, these archetypal structures evolved alongside us, just like our eyebrows or our hands, etc. It may be odd to wrap your mind around, but the preparedness itself for unique human experiences of certain kinds have been prepared for psychologically through the process of evolution. I mentioned at the beginning also that this information was like the 90s action movie trope where like the two people are like 1, 2, 3, whoosh, and they unlock the key and then the MacGuffin is revealed, This is just powerful stuff. The book was published in 1983, which means, Stevens had been working on it a while prior to that. It does chill me to the bone that this information isn't more of common knowledge. And I think it's, Carl Jung is kind of dismissed as a crackpot. And there's an obsession with evidence-based therapy and analysis now. Like, you made these claims and therapists have to cite, what's the evidence, And it can be frustrating to cite archetypal, this and that. So anyway, you see the title. This brings us now to Archetypes, Ethics, and Society. And we've sprinkled a little bit here and there on these topics, how to the extent that men and women make up society, which is a large extent, and we've talked a lot about men and women's archetypal nature and how it can become manifest and actualized through their upbringing by, a two-parent household, ideally, where the boys and girls get a healthy dose of contrasexual modeling, with contrasexual meaning the opposite sex. Little girls get to see a man in their father, and little boys get to see a woman in their mother. Well, and more to that, there's a situation that we're set up to, assuming that there is a two-parent household, the girl's development is such that she identifies with the mother, but with the little boys, the mother is the first archetype, being that we're all born, but unique to boys is that they have to break away from their initial bond with the mother to identify with the father. So it's kind of like an act of revolution. There's like an extra step, an extra kind of potency that has to be unlocked for a reorientation of the child's self-identity. And again, we talked about that when you raise children, they go out into the world, and to the extent that children are people, and to the extent that people make up the world, how you raise your children is how the world is going to be. And now now we arrive here at Archetypes, Ethics, and Society. And one quick other note is that in the last episode, we talked about initiation and transformation, and how, especially for men, like, girls always know that they become women. It's an introverted experience when they have their period. But boys becoming men is an extroverted matter, as Dr. Anthony Stevens says. An extroverted and political, because men carry the burden of the society's survival on their shoulders. And this stems back to ancient times for obvious reasons. They were the hunters, and if they did not succeed, the tribe did not succeed. So when hunting parties went out, they had to be sure everyone was on the same page. I'm oversimplifying here, but a way to guarantee that is to make boys into men. Now, and I'm bringing all this context because it's going to be, it will help when we go into this material in this section to have all the different angles in mind when we dive into the deep end here, to the deeper end. But in the last episode we talked about transformation and how it's not the body. There's homeostasis, right? The body does not want to change. The body does not want to expend energy to do anything. And we talked about psychic inertia, which is a archetypal psychological term to mean resistance to change, like starting a new habit or trying to reach a goal or whatever. There's always this inertia, psychic inertia, that wants to keep the same lifestyle, and this can manifest in all sorts of ways, like choosing comfort over doing what you should do, and or procrastinating or self-sabotaging, and others have talked about this using other terms. I know Stephen Pressfield has like the war of art, right? And there's this fascinating thing where Stephen says that it's really hard for even groups of humans, or much less atomized individuals like we find ourselves in 21st century more and more, to just do things all on your own 100%. And it's not impossible, but there's an argument out there that while in the 21st century we're more advanced than the primitives technologically, perhaps psychologically we're inferior. We're going backwards. And initiations allow men, especially because the survival of the tribe is dependent on the men. So the more intense and structured and sealed, and we talked about alchemy and how containers can get sealed for transformation, how precise the initiations are has a direct correlation to the thriving of the tribe. These rituals involve the humiliation, the education in tribal lore for the initiates, the hazing, and a critical death and symbolic death and rebirth of the initiate. And all these things are overseen by a tribal elder. Elders who know what the rituals should be, how they should be performed, to cook, and we use this alchemical term, to cook the initiate properly so that necessary transformation for the tribe's survival can take place. This has been a hell of an introduction. But I really hope y'all are, I want to get everyone on the same page. And like I said, it's just, this book, one reason I chose it, it's well written, but it's just filled with revelation after revelation. And again, I always say this, but don't take my word for anything. Go read the damn book, do your own research. I'm average intelligence. I'm learning about all this stuff with y'all. So I'm a huge fan on this channel. I just want to send up the flare and say, hey, there might be something here for y'all, and take it or leave it. Take what is useful and discard the rest. But I also want to hear from y'all in the comments what y'all are thinking about all this. Is this all nutty, or is there maybe something to this? So, all that being said, let's move on. So what we're talking about, and so archetypal psychology isn't really about moral right and wrongs. I titled this Archetypes, Ethics, and Society. We're not talking about right and wrong, but we cannot deny that, again, the term victim culture gets thrown around maybe a little too much these days, but it's important not to forget that to an extent, there are real victims, and at least that's my opinion. And I do believe that a government, and I'm an anarcho-capitalist, so really boils my blood when I, have to sit here and watch the actions of governments wreak havoc. And anyway, if you want to know more about my stance on anarcho-capitalism, let me know. And I emphasize that, archetypes, ethics, and society. Societies are under the umbrella of governments, and there's an extent to which governments or the tribes kind of color and set the boundaries, or lack thereof, to how cultural customs can manifest themselves. So Dr. Stevens talks about the frustration of archetypal energy, and this is just when either the archetypal energy is perverted or not able to manifest. Like, in the clearest example would be abusive parents or absent parents. And so, Dr. Stevens observes that archetypal behaviors are genetically inherited, which themselves evolve through natural selection. and that any societal structure or way of life which veers off from these results in personal distortions or even the extinction of entire peoples. Basically, I mean, this is huge. He's making the argument here that if we are not utilizing our internal, naturally selected, evolved, ready to go, made for us as human beings equipment, then it can even result in the extinction of entire peoples. So this, the stakes are quite high. He believes that an understanding of the archetypes of human nature would result in better social policies if they were sufficiently understood and articulated. He cites the anthropologist Robin Fox on this point, who says that if there is no defined human nature, any social system is as valid as any other, as there'd be no objective standards to judge. Let me know what you think in the comments below about that. It sounds like cultural relativism to me, and seems like a interesting observation. Dr. Stevens talks about ways archetypal energies can manifest in ways that are overactivated either in their male and female aspects. And he calls these Patrist or Matrist, father or mother, archetypal energies that take over society. So check this out. He says, where members of a society primarily believe in a sky god, like the Mongol hordes of Genghis Khan, that's my addition here, their culture tends to be puritanical in sexual matters, to assign a low status to women, and to exhibit an authoritarian political structure. Where an Earth Mother is worshipped, on the other hand, the culture tends to be permissive in sexual matters, grant women high status, and its politics are broadly egalitarian. Fascism is the ultimate expression of father dominance. The ultimate expression of mother dominance is communism. Now get ready for this. It is perhaps not without significance that Nazism took root in the German fatherland, while communism found its home in Mother Russia. Wow. I never made that connection, but this is just, these kinds of revelations are like on every page in this book. I just got such a thrill out of that. But that is such a fantastic revelation. I can't get over it. He says, Marxist utopias cannot exist because the father archetype prevents them. They may come in within a hair's breadth of realization, as in some hippie communes in the 1960s, but the father archetype inevitably takes his revenge on them, and they perish. The mother-dominant society is fine for the women, as long as there is enough protein and shelter, and no war to be fought. But it is emasculating for the men, and the father archetype just will not stand for it. And that is that. So Stevens talks about a term called enantiodromia, which is the propensity of all polarized phenomena to go over to their opposite. Interesting. So basically, the more the pendulum is pulled to one side, the greater pull there is for just a lot of acceleration to the other side, basically. And Molyneux had a great quote about that history is largely a pendulum that swings between worship of government, between statism and aka atheism and like theism. I'm butchering that. Don't quote me. I'm quoting from memory here, but he said something like that. This is Stefan Molyneux. I've mentioned him a couple times on the channel, almost every video on this. But yeah, I'm blinking on the quote, but it kind of makes sense too. There's, to get to the extremes, you have to repress a lot, whether you're trying to be overly masculine or really, overly feminine. You want to go for balance. And, again, Aristotle and the golden mean, perhaps you want to balance, not, extremes are basically, as Dr. Stevens might say, archetypal distortions. So he goes on. Prosperity, social justice, equality, the greatest good to the greatest number, that's utilitarianism. All are high ideals, but their shadow side is a vast bureaucracy, ubiquitous state ownership and intervention, statute books filled with penal laws, more restrictions and less freedom. #anarcho-capitalism. Moreover, to impose a Marxist paradise inevitably demands a ruthless Procrusteanism, which is a forceful limb cutting to fit yourself into a certain mold, because it is an ideal which contravenes too many archetypes. It cannot be imposed and maintained save by the gun, backed up with officious censorship and omniscient secret police force in a chain of concentration camps. Marxism, without compulsion, assumes that when men are made equal, they will no longer wish to own personal property, acquire territory, compete for valued resources, or form roots to acquire power, pick quarrels, and impose their will. But in fact, these things are so deeply programmed in our nature that nothing short of tyranny will stop them. He says the increasing employment of female teachers to instruct and discipline boys in the production of feminized males. When the educational system is dominated by women, the male initiation archetype is broken in the feminine rather than to the feminine rather than the masculine characteristics in pupils of whichever sex. Thus, the male characteristics of greater aggression, wider-ranging physical activity, and environmental exploration are thwarted by the schoolman's insistence on sitting still, walking sedately, keeping quiet, being courteous, and listening carefully to what the teacher says. Not surprisingly, this causes rebelliousness amongst boys and their aggression, instead of being channeled in the directions useful to the community. We talked about it. That's why I brought up initiations being an extroverted political endeavor, is displaced into socially destructive behavior. The universal anthropological finding is that politics, like warfare, is essentially a masculine concern. In the business of politics, is it everywhere the same? The occupation of territory, establishment of the power structure, and the maintenance of the law. Patriarchy, it seems, is the natural condition of mankind. Indeed, nothing is more likely to produce apoplexy in a feminist than the suggestion that society could conceivably encourage or condone aggression in boys and reward nurturance in girls, because boys really are more aggressive and girls really are more nurturing, and that nature, rather than society, might have made them so for good reason. All right? Ultimately, it is neither the fault of the teacher nor pupil, elder nor novice, but the consequence of a collective crisis of confidence in our culture, the loss of respect for traditional values, the progressive relativization of all canons and ethics results in a conceptual miasma in which one television interviewee's opinion is as good as another. Although the intentions behind these attitudes are indisputably humane and therefore unexceptionable, they have unfortunately been elevated to the status of sacred lore. Thus, to question the wisdom of educational policies based on them is to invite persecution as a heretic and to risk banishment from university campuses all over the world. Even to consider the argument that there might be something to be said for educating boys and girls separately, teaching them different curricula, and preparing them for different roles in life, or that the intellectually bright might be given different kinds of instructions from the less able, is to reveal oneself as a convicted reactionary who deserves to be ostracized by all right-thinking people. Yet it was not always so. What has changed? This is some epic writing. Almost 4 decades ago. Stevens, is spitting facts, as the kids would say. But yeah, having been through the manosphere, I mean, all this could be said by like Jordan Peterson. It's chillingly contemporary. Yeah, let me know in the comments below what y'all think about that. And I mean, yeah, like I said, it reminds me, again, it could have been written yesterday. And I think of Warren Farrell, who talks a lot about these topics, not so much in psychological terms, but socio-political. And he's my favorite guy when talking about those specific issues. So, as Dr. Stevens mentions above, when we strive for egalitarianism, we put ourselves in a Procrustean bed where the parts of us that don't fit in are cut off. Yeah, this is why I'm drawn to Jung and archetypal psychology. It's largely about reuniting those lost limbs that we've had to cut off to fit in and becoming whole again through the process of individuation. And fundamentally, this is Stevens talking. Fundamentally, Jung observed that modernity's increasing collectivism often came at the expense of the individual's ability to actualize themselves through individuation. I'm really thinking about men here too, though. Specifically, I'm interrupting the quote here, but in the manosphere and other areas, like socio-political areas of thought, men are going through a big crisis right now as a group. And various thinkers have different theories as to why. My intuition, and my friend said, there needs to be more tigers in society. Why? Because it used to be our mandate for men that we protect and provide, right? So like Stevens is saying here, that modernity's increasing collectivism often came at the expense of the individual's ability to actualize themselves through individuation. If the archetype of protection has now been outsourced to big daddy government and providing for women, which is another thing men are used to doing, archetypally used to doing. Now we have welfare. So men have become like concubines to women. We're like broken women, imperfect women. We've lost our natural mandate, and no wonder we're lost and having trouble. And even women are feeling the effects, So to continue the quote, and then we'll wrap this up. Jung never advocated society's return to the church, but rather intense psychological work on the part of each individual to achieve their own potential, thus opening their minds to life-enhancing symbols. The tie of individuals to see these symbols is nothing less than the tie to the universe itself. And we'll talk more about symbols, the archetypal power they contain, and how they relate to the transcendent function in a future episode. So I'll leave it there. There's a lot packed in. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Again, don't take my word for anything. I'm just a fan. I love this stuff. Look forward to hearing from y'all, and see y'all in the next one. Bye-bye.